Hey everybody, how you guys doing? So I was sitting around thinking about stuff, as I often do, and one of the things that fascinates me, as many of you know, the moon and Mars. You know, maybe one day we're going to get to the moon, either to colonize it, or probably more realistically, set up a space station that will allow us to get to Mars easier than going directly from Earth to Mars. Because let's be frank, to get off this blue marble takes a tremendous amount of energy, a pant load of fuel that, quite frankly, I'm not sure we have any to spare. We don't have a square to spare. But I think as aspirational and as much hope of adventure and excitement as the concept of going to the moon and then going to Mars is, we may be unintentionally preventing those two things from actually happening. Unintentionally, but I think it's a real possibility, and I wanted to talk about it a little bit. I don't know what you're thinking. How can this be, Ryan? How can this be? Well, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you right now. A little backstory, though. So today, there's about 4,550 satellites orbiting our blue marble, here at Spaceship Earth. 4,550 that are in orbit. Now, there's four types of orbit. Low Earth orbit, and within low Earth orbit, there's about 3,800 satellites, and a fair number of those are communication and other types of satellites. Our second orbit is medium Earth orbit. There's about 140 satellites in medium Earth orbit, and those are navigation satellites for the most part. Orbit number 3 is called the highly elliptical orbit, and there's only 56 satellites currently in this orbit type, and those are radio and communication satellites. And then our fourth and final is geosynchronous orbit, which is obviously navigation and some technical satellites and whatnot. Now, an interesting thing, of the 4,550 satellites, 63% of them, 63% are communication, 22% are sort of Earth observational, which I believe would be like weather, would probably be the best example of that. 4% are for navigation, and the remaining 11% or so are technological and science-based. Now, the USA has got about 2,800 of the 4,550 that are up there. So we own the majority of the satellites. Interesting note, over 1,600 of the 2,800 belong to SpaceX. Mr. Elon Musk owns over half of the satellites currently, at least that are owned by the United States. He owns half of them. China's only got about 467. So let me say that again. The United States of America has got about 2,800 satellites. China, the number 2, is 467. Then Great Britain has got about 349. Russia's got about 108, and it kind of dwindles quickly from there. But we have an incredible number of satellites circling this blue marble. And I thought it was interesting that of the 2,800 or so that the USA owns, over 1,600 belong to Elon Musk. Now, I just want to mention that Musk and SpaceX have said in the next 20 years, they plan to launch another 42,000 satellites into Earth's orbit. 42,000! That's an assload of satellites in 20 years. And I want to mention all of this because keep in mind, these satellites or objects, they're traveling around the planet at about 19,000 miles an hour, which, if you're not aware, that's really, really fast. So we've got 4,500 plus satellites traveling at 19,000 miles an hour, just going around the planet. And as you all know, because I just mentioned it earlier, it's really, really hard to get shit off this planet. We have to use rockets and a pant load of fuel to get into, well, what we consider space or again, low Earth orbit. And those rockets burn fuel, and we've seen it on a million times on TV. As each portion of the rocket burns off, it gets jettisoned to get the weight off of whatever we're trying to launch. Now, some of that stuff, it floats back down to space and burns up in the atmosphere, but a lot of it doesn't. It gets caught in Earth's gravitational orbit, and it stays there forever, spinning around at 19,000+ miles an hour. Now, low Earth orbit is about 63 miles off the surface of the Earth, give or take. And it's a perfect spot because the atmosphere is thin enough for whatever is there to continuously spin, because there's really no air. And if it were to waffle at all, the air could catch it and would drag it into our atmosphere where it would theoretically burn up. But again, not all of that stuff necessarily falls back to Earth. We've got countless rockets, stages of rockets that are spinning around this planet at 19,000 miles an hour. From what I understand, every year 3 to 4 satellites. Satellites, their fuel burns out or stuff runs into them and they break apart, and those pieces continue to spin at 19,000 miles an hour. And if you can imagine going that fast, when it hits, it just, everything continues to go 19,000 miles an hour. So when something tears through it, now those little teeny pieces are going 19,000 miles an hour. We've done a zillion missile tests up there, caused explosions. There's just tons and tons of debris. As a matter of fact, there's about, we already said, a little over 4,500 satellites spinning around the planet. There's over 10,000 pieces of crap about the size of a computer monitor shooting around the planet. There's another 20,000 about the size of an apple. About 500,000 pieces are about the size of a marble. And they think of well over 100 million that are smaller than a marble that they can't track, all spinning essentially in the same orbital space, going 19,000 miles an hour. And I'm sure you know, most of those satellites, there's a trillions, not just 1 trillion, trillions of dollars of infrastructure up there. And if 3 to 4 satellites are destroyed every year, either by little bits of debris, or I don't know that they run into each other necessarily, but when they do, they just explode into that many more pieces. And as that many more pieces explode, they continue to go 19,000 miles an hour. And one of the things we have to be concerned about is they call it a collision cascade, because it when one hits, 1 or 2 hit, you don't really feel that. But when one hits, it explodes. Let's just say it explodes into 10,000 pieces. And now those 10,000 pieces are going 19,000 miles an hour. And they have the potential to hit another object, which is going to explode into 1 million pieces. And it creates another 1 million pieces that go 19,000 miles an hour, and so on and so forth. So at some point, we could literally destroy every satellite that is currently in our system in a matter of days, really, if this collision cascade were to happen. And the sad reality is that becomes a more real possibility as we continue to put more and more satellites up there. And getting back to my point, we may be unintentionally preventing ourselves from getting the moon, because the reality is there's going to be so much debris in space going so fast, it won't be safe to put a man or a woman, shoot them up into space, because odds are they're going to get struck by something, say, the size of a pea, going 19,000 miles an hour. It would destroy a ship, or if it hit a rocket full of fuel, it'd be game over. So there's actually a group of people, super nerd scientists, that are trying to figure out a way to maybe clean up some of this debris that involves nets, magnets, I suppose some other rockets. And I just thought that was kind of interesting, that it's not something that's really talked about. But the reality is, in order for us to get to the moon, we've got to do a better job. Not only polluting the planet, we're actually polluting space to the point where we may not be able to get off this rock, if we had to even, for centuries. If all of these satellites were to miraculously collide together or get hit by something, there'd be so much debris, it'd almost be like a ring of Saturn, and we'd never be able to get through it, at least with our technology today. So I thought that was kind of interesting. If you have any interest in this, there's actually a really cool website. It's called, I think it's Dewesoft.com, DEWESOFT.com. That was a great resource of information of how many satellites, who owns the satellites. I found that very interesting. There's a lot of cats that own satellites that you're not aware of. And who knows what they do. But anyway, I thought that was kind of an interesting topic, and I wanted to share it with you. Hopefully you got a kick out of this. And always remember, in this world, when you could be anything you want, you be kind, you be humble, you be forgiving, and you be melting snow. And since you and I can't clean up the crap and trash in space, pick up the trash here on the planet. We need to. Have a good night.